Greetings and welcome to episode 5 of Askophilia, where we answer your dual universe questions. Everyone get in your ships. Let's get started. Question 1. Can you talk to us about the high memory usage of DU?
Dual Universe is not completely optimized yet, and so there are still one or two things that we can improve regarding memory usage. And actually, we are working on optimizing these kind of things right now, and you should expect, for instance, the next version of the game to use slightly less memory. And the other thing is, this wasn't reported as a high priority issue by the community as a whole, and so we didn't give kind of a high priority to reduce the game memory usage. Essentially, if most players and the majority of the community is fine with the current memory usage, we don't want to spend valuable developer resources on optimizing this part of the game. Although, if this becomes an issue and there is a mass report of people being unable to play the game because of the game using too much memory, that's definitely something we can improve. And there are multiple places in the code where we can definitely reduce how much memory the game uses.
Question 2. Will HQ hexes owned by inactive accounts ever become unowned?
Yes, so that is something that is entirely within the realm of possibility. So it is something that we intentionally chose not to include in the first version of IAR, Inactive Asset Requisitioning. This was, due to the various concerns. We didn't want to be too aggressive with it, and we didn't want to go, too crazy. As you know, right now, IAR only deals with constructs. But one of the reasons we actually named it Inactive Asset Recovery is that the goal was always that this system could tackle different type of assets, and that includes things like territories. So ultimately, we know that some people will leave the game due to various reasons, and it doesn't really make sense for their HQ territories to be inaccessible for the rest of time. So I think it is reasonable to accept that at some point, IAR may sort of take upon the job of clearing out those inactive territories.
Question 3. Are there plans to rework the flight UI and the widget wall?
As you know, we are releasing a revamp of the Lua API, so we're working on the same time on a new default flight configuration and flight system. So we know there are several issues and widgets are one of them. Our goal is to keep the important information visible, but reduce it at the same time. Some solutions are being considered and we're currently working on it. So yes, it's planned and we're working on it.
Question 4. Can you please talk about the many variations of Honeycomb?
So yeah, this is another subject of just trying to find the time amongst all the other things that we have to do and try and prioritize. It is obvious to us as well that we can do better when it comes to managing honeycomb variations. It's not ideal to have an individual inventory item for every single variation of the honeycomb, right? So you're going to have, your 20 steel and your 20 aluminum and your 20 box, all this stuff. From an interface perspective, it's not very pretty. From a usability perspective, it's definitely not ideal. So, we would very much like to go in the direction of having some sort of base material, like base aluminum honeycomb, and then you can paint whatever the interface ends up being. You can just select which texture you would like on that selection of voxels. That would be a better solution. It's not something that we're against. We just, again, have to try to fit it in, amongst all the other things that we're trying to fit in.
Question 5. Can you please tell us more about the planet revamps?
As you already know, we redid some planets, for instance, Diego, which was kind of barren planet before, and then we added trees and improved the geometry a little bit. And what we did in Diego, we plan to do on every planet in the Helios system. So For instance, Thales or Mattis, those planets are kind of really barren and uninteresting on the surface with kind of a lack of ground assets. Other than the surface harvest, you don't really have any rocks, for instance. So we are actually working right now on redoing and improving those planets so that in the future, maybe through a geometry reset like what we did in the past, we can give you a better version of those planets. You have to keep in mind that, those planets, most of them, we did them really quickly for the launch or for the previous release without having much time to finalize them. And we are right now working on improving them to keep kind of a more finished version for the final game.
Question 6. Could you talk about the thinking behind stasis weapons?
Yeah, so in regards to stasis weapons, the first thing is that it was a big step for us because it was the first non-damage PvP interaction between two constructs, right? So previous to stasis, you could, identify people, lock them, and then you could shoot them with a variety of weapons, right? And that would do damage, and we know how that works, right? And now stasis, we've sort of taken a big step, for us at least, in terms of creating an interaction that is non-damage based, but still offensive and still very PvP based. So the reason we did that is in regards to the new max speed rules, we wanted players to be able to interact with the speed of other constructs in a relatively dynamic way. We wanted speed to be affected, and we wanted players to control how they affected that speed. So one thing that's important is that we wanted to introduce the notion, for example, that certain construct could catch up to other constructs, right? And we wanted to have this idea that a construct could catch up to another construct and then slow it down and pin it down, right? And then whether that be for himself to take advantage of the extra mobility to outmaneuver the target that was being slowed down, or whether that was because you were waiting for backup, right? I mean, if you were chasing, a heavy transport or a heavy PvP ship, that was going maybe 20,000 because it was past that sort of critical cap. And you were in a light, one-man fighter that was designed for speed, and you're maybe going 45,000 plus, maybe even closer to 50,000. You would be able to very effectively catch up to that ship if you knew where it was, which is maybe a different subject. And then you would be able to slow it down with your stasis weapons. And then that would allow your own heavy ships to catch up to that ship, because now their ship, the target that you're hunting, would be going 10,000 down from 20,000, and your own heavy PvP ships that are coming in behind would still be going 20,000. So they'd have, a 10,000 kilometers per hour differential. So that was like a whole notion that we were trying to create around stasis. And in addition to that, it was sort of always in the goal of creating more niches and more opportunities for smaller, lighter, and faster constructs. So as part of the speed changes, a lighter construct was naturally advantaged by being able to go faster. But now, by having access to some of these stasis weapons, they have more opportunities to be able to sort of be useful, right? So a ship that's very heavy can never really catch up to another ship in order to apply stasis weapons to it. But a ship that's very light, now you might want, a couple of light ships, maybe even a couple of light parented ships, right? If you have your heavy PvP construct, maybe you can keep, a small fighter, towed in the back, parented, and maybe someone can hop in it with a couple of stasis weapons and then, fly out at max speed and try to catch up to somebody once you've spotted them on a radar, and maybe they're trying to escape. You can, chase them down with a lighter construct with some stasis weapons. So that was sort of the whole goal and the whole ecosystem that we were trying to create between, the max speed changes and then the interactions with stasis weapons.
That's it for this episode of Ask Ophelia. Please remember, if you have any Dual Universe gameplay questions you would like to ask, make sure to use the submission form in the description below. Until next time,